welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley talking to you from Washington, D.C. Now, the great untold story of the past week, which has been covered up by all sorts of self-interested media outlets, and indeed by politicians in their various antics, is the growing potential for a breakup of the fascist and reactionary Republican Party. That the Republican Party could split into two or more parts, and or it could also die what seems to be an inevitable but possibly accelerated demographic death because of its refusal to entertain voters, to seek for voters who are not white, not native-born, not Southerners, not gun owners, not rural, not socially, impacted and essentially bigoted, trying to project some value system of their own on everybody else in defiance of the famous separation of church and state, church and mosque, church and synagogue. You mentioned all of them. They're all separate. Can't be the basis of the U.S. government. So the Republican Party this week came to open war. And the scene, interestingly enough, was the State of the Union address given by Obama. Now, let me just talk to the Republican side of this first, and then we can get the issue of how Obama seems to be willfully blind, right? Willfully, hysterically not addressing the real legacy that he ought to have, which would be to leave us with the Republican Party as a smoking derelict drifting off on the waters after being thoroughly pummeled. And the key, of course, is the divide between the reactionary donor elite, the various Koch brothers, the Mercers that we found in the Ted Cruz machine, the Sheldon Adelsons who want to make a foreign policy which is antithetical to U.S. interests, and other such fat cats, such billionaires, the Carl Icahns, and so forth. So that's the one side of it. And then on the other side, you've got the crazed, betrayed. Certainly they are betrayed, but they're crazed and betrayed, and they are reacting irrationally, right? They are not rational. They don't do things that would actually solve their problems. They act out a series of compulsive, irrational, and really self-destructive things. That would be the base, the plebeians, the petty bourgeois, crazed. So there's a fight, and these groups, frankly, as we saw in the 20s and 30s, tend to evolve towards fascism faster even than certain people in the elite. And then this phenomenon has a name. It is called Trump, and it is called Cruz, who may soon be catapulted into the position of victor in the Iowa caucuses, right? The whole world wants to know what's the ground operation and get out the vote operation for Trump in Iowa. On this much will hang. So unfortunately, the fate of the United States is given into the hands of people who are, of course, low information voters, and they are preyed upon by rather vicious Elmer Gantries, right? These would be the evangelical voters. We had an interesting woman just came on the retarded reactionary ranting show. You know who that guy is. And she said that she thought that Cruz she reminded him of a preacher who would strip old people of their money, and that he learned his techniques on a used car lot. Good. And would you buy a used car from Ted Cruz? I actually have to take a moment. This week, I think the the diagnosis, the predominant description of Cruz this past week has turned out to be hypocrite. And hypocrite is what I have been telling you. The sallow-faced hypocrite, the Dickensian hypocrite. Mr. Pecksniff runs for office. That's Martin Chuzzlewit by Dickens. Look it up. So all of these characteristics of Cruz's are now getting recognized. So the idea was this. We had the Obama speech, the State of the Union address. I'd like to talk about that. But the principal thing was the Republican reply to the State of the Union address. And this was Nikki Haley, the Republican, and actually Tea Party elected governor of South Carolina. She's now in her second term. She wants to be promoted, and she became the vehicle of a statement, really, by the Republican establishment of Washington, D.C. She was given her text by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, by Speaker of the House Paul Ryan of the John Birch Society, and by Reince Priebus, the chairman of the Republican National Committee, the party boss of the Republicans. And she came out with an attack on Trump. The quote was, "Today we live in a time of threats like few others in recent memory. During anxious times, it can be tempting to follow the siren call of the angriest voices. We must resist that temptation. No one who is willing to work hard, abide by our laws, and love our traditions should ever feel unwelcome in this country." Now, this was a declaration of war, a red flag to the inflamed imaginations of the Republican fascist factions, because, of course, the siren call, I mean, from a literary point of view, unfortunately, this poor woman doesn't know what she's doing. Can you imagine Donald Trump as a siren? Oh, my God. It means a temptress. No. This is not Trump. But anyway, you get the idea. It's the angriest voice. That's Trump. He has later embraced that description. And then the question was, if you're willing to work hard, abide by the law, and love the traditions, then you should be welcome. But that is no good from the point of view of the fascistoid factions in the Republican Party. And we ought to cite Ann Coulter, who is resurrecting her career, right? She had been on the way out, according to any number of things, right? She had been reduced to appearing on late night, rather obscure programs on Fox News, like the Red Eye group, right, where she was forced to rub elbows with upstarts and nobodies. But now Ann Coulter has relaunched herself as a, well, let's say, beyond reactionary passionaria, and her line was, Trump should deport Nikki Haley, who had essentially gone to the length of making this public attack. Now, it's really interesting to say Nikki Haley is there as the official voice of the Republican Party. She has been given this slot. She's got Mitch McConnell, she's got Paul Ryan and Priebus in her corner, and they're all pushing her forward to go out and do this, right? So maybe she's a little bit desperate. She wants to be promoted, so she did it. It is, in my recollection, unheard of that a political party would use its reply to the State of the Union in order to attack its own presidential frontrunner. A very rare event, but it means civil war, open war among the Republicans. And we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're just reviewing the Sturm und Drang in the Republican Party this week. There is open factional warfare, an open civil war in the Republican Party. They're fighting among themselves. They're on the verge of a split. The split could be a top-down event. The split could come if Trump says, "You're not treating me fairly." If he loses, this is practically guaranteed. If he loses the nomination, at some point there's a a very high probability that will say, the reason I'm losing is not because of me, but because I'm not being treated fairly by these Republican Party hacks, and therefore we're going to strike out on our own. Perfectly possible. With a third party, a new bull moose party, we might say. The party of Trumpery. Trumpery. Hey, Trumpery. Great word. It means, according to various definitions, showy but worthless. It means rubbish, trash. That's trumpery. Comes from the French tromper, meaning to deceive, to cheat, to betray. And that includes cheating in the context of adultery. So the party of trumpery could split away from the tired old GOP, and that would essentially be a neo-fascist party. Or, again, through the inevitable demographic attrition of the fact that this group has decided to identify itself with aging white males in the South who are evangelical Christians or in some other part of the United States. It just won't work. So this then became grist for the mill. Governor Haley went on NBC in the morning and told Matt Lauer, yes, it's true, I was talking about Trump. He was one of the main ones, not only him, but he's one of the ones I was targeting. Now, as long as Trump thinks he's going to win, he's not going to respond to this. But again, once he begins to stumble, we can count on him to strike back in some way. And of course, on the other side, we have Cruz. Cruz is certainly one of the most odious hypocrites that we've seen in politics in a long, long time. And he is universally hated among the people who know him, because it's clear he believes in nothing. He has no cause and no belief except his own pathological ego, his own wretched ambition, and he will sell anybody down the river. So a very ugly personality. Now, this debate later in the week was dominated by the issue of the fact that he was born in Canada. And, of course, the U.S. Constitution stipulates you've got to be a natural-born citizen. If you're born in Canada, you're not a natural-born citizen under the circumstances that he was. We'll get to this also in a minute. Cruz, as a demagogue, has now had recourse to one of the most threadbare, discredited, and ridiculous GOP campaign lines, which is you campaign saying that you represent the values of the state where you're trying to win an election. I remember reading one about one guy a couple of years ago was running on Indiana values, not Washington, D.C. values, mind you, but Indiana values. And, of course, there are Mississippi values and, of course, North Dakota values and on and on. Well, the New York values are embraced by Cruz to the tune of $1.2 million in a loan from Goldman Sachs and Citibank, the heart of Wall Street, the absolute heart and liver and stomach of Wall Street. That's who he gets along with best. His wife, the inimitable Heidi, works for Goldman Sachs. Ted Cruz looks pretty healthy thanks to his Goldman Sachs health care that he got on his wife's job. Those are the New York values that this guy cares about. In other words, money, Wall Street values. That's what he goes for. Not even New York values, right? He's not for the Bronx or Queens values. He wants Lower Manhattan, Wall Street values. So this guy is odious. Now, the Canadian Cruz and his Wall Street values are pitted against Trump in Iowa. Everybody's waiting to see what happens in the Iowa caucuses. Now it's going to be February 1st. Does Trump have a ground organization can he translate his rising poll numbers into caucus goers? Because that's always the big thing. If you've ever done the Iowa caucus, you know how hard it is to get people to come out and then to stand up in front of their bigoted and gossipy neighbors and put your hand up and stand there for some kind of a anti-establishment or unorthodox faction. Right? Remember that the sinking in of opinions and new people goes more slowly out in rural areas. So let's also take a minute to talk about Nikki Haley. Now she has gotten a lot of intense attention and admiration, right? Because the various media think of her as someone who's willing to stand up to the bully and misogynist and Islamophobe and xenophobe Trump. Well, let's not give our hearts away to Nikki Haley too quickly. This charming lady, the child of Sikh parents from India, who for some reason went to South Carolina. She has been widely accused of moral turpitude, and that is to say of trumpery, concupiscence. Her track record is thought to be adultery, giving out favors in exchange for political favors, put it that way. You can find all that. The Huffington Post has got a collection of articles about that. So anyway, that's obviously indicative if somebody's going to be a holier than thou, right? A takfiri here in the United States, right? You're going to be holier than thou. Well, if this is then your lifestyle, right? This is like so many Republicans that we've seen, right? Getting caught in public toilets and things like this. Anyway, with her, it's more that various people have come forward and accused her of various things. We can't go into the details on those. The main thing about her is an obscene social safety net policy. She wants to tear it up. The Medicaid expansion, right? One of the good things in Obamacare, she has stopped 340,000 in South Carolina from getting Medicaid. How many deaths? Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Make sure you keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. Tarpley.net. There you get the morning briefing. Five mornings a week. Not Sunday and not Monday, but all other days there's some new insight into what's going on in the world. We're heavily domestic this month, obviously. We were oriented towards the developments in Syria and so forth. We're going to have some updates about Syria, hopefully, today. But the domestic question, and it's really, if you think about what the Republican Party has done to the world through somebody like George W. Bush and George H.W. Bush, who started the current series of Middle East wars back in 1990, 1991. The question of the Republican Party ought to interest everybody on this planet. We say it is within measurable distance of breaking up, of collapsing, of ceasing to exist. And again, the key point is there are two fights going on. We have two fascist gangs. We have the Trump fascist gang, which has certain characteristics, and then we have the rival Cruz fascist gang. And this obviously generates a lot of heat. And again, we'll be looking if that British company that specialized in color revolutions and overthrowing governments, if they're able to pull something like that for Trump in Iowa, then this could become quite a protracted fight between these two fascist demagogues. At the same time, as I said before, we've got this issue of the elite donor class, the money guys, the money men, clashing with the crazed plebeians and petty bourgeois of the base. And we've got other factions in there. Obviously, when you see Jeb Bush, that's a faction of the CIA. Apparently, with Rubio, that's another faction of the CIA. If you've got Rand Paul, That's the Southern Jurisdiction Scottish Rite Freemasons. And the life seems to have gone out of their booze, right? Their factions seem to be not active enough, although Little Rand is claiming he's got 1,000 precinct captains. The main thing we see is that he couldn't get himself into that debate. He threw a hissy fit, and he ended up nowhere out in the cold, which I think is not smart. One of the features of this debate later in the week was the fall of the dynasties. The CIA Bush dynasty, or OSS CIA Bush dynasty, is in bad shape, and the Paultard dynasty is leading in a very bad direction. Notice that libertarianism is now turning more and more proto-fascist, in the sense that it's more and more a question of supporting armed gangs who claim to be carrying out civil disobedience. Well, civil disobedience does not include brandishing assault rifles and heavy-duty pistols or anything of that kind. So this is simply a fraud. We'll say something about Argonne in a minute. So Cruz has generated a considerable backlash against himself. One of the things you have to notice, though, is when Cruz says New York values, what does that mean? I'm thinking of certain rantings by Jesse Jackson several decades ago, right? New York values, it seems to me, is fairly open, thinly veiled expression of anti-Semitism. That's what I see there. And what Cruz is essentially saying is, I could never carry New York anyway, says Cruz, but what I need to do right now is to carry Iowa, and among those Christian evangelicals, there is this undercurrent, and therefore he's appealing to it. Again, the New York Daily News, drop dead Ted. Interestingly, Limbaugh is now inclining more and more to Cruz. For example, today, Limbaugh went so far as to mock the 9/11 events, right? And of course, this means the human tragedy side of it, right? The deaths, the people who became incurably ill, the first responders, the volunteers, and all this. Limbaugh is willing to mock 9/11 to help Cruz against Trump. A very noticeable change, I think you'd have to say. All right. So it's also interesting in the course of the debate yesterday evening that the questions, especially as posed by Fox News, by Fox Business Channel, they are attempting, obviously, to hide this war, this faction fight, this potential split, which continues to build inside the Republican Party, because obviously Fox News is trying to prevent the stupefied base of the Republican Party from realizing, if they haven't already, right, because a lot of people are very dumb and they don't get it, that there's factional warfare, that the whole thing could blow up. Now, we have to go back also to Obama. Obama's State of the Union address. I think this, in many ways, was a pathetic utterance. You remember that early in the Obama campaign, he made a speech to donors in San Francisco, and he talked about the bitter clingers. The bitter clingers, in other words, the people who had been shafted by life. The jobs went away and didn't come back, right? Because of certain policies, obviously. But Obama, people behind closed doors, but then the tape came out that they're clinging bitterly to guns, to anti-trade, and to ethnic prejudice against other groups, the other, as they always call it. Obama, I would say, is a bitter clinger in his own right, and that is clinging bitterly to this phantom of bipartisanship. What was that? That was always the stupidest and most needless aspect of the Obama campaign, that I can work across the aisle. I can arrange bipartisan solutions. Who wants this? This may appeal to those fussy independents, but they don't know what's going on. We don't care about bipartisanship. That's a process reform. We've got to have results. The American family needs to be defended. They need health care, education, housing, a job, an income, help on student loans, all the rest of this. That's what counts. We don't care about bipartisanship. So the lesson is that Obama has not given this up. Now, this could, of course, mean that he's looking for some kind of a grand bargain on entitlements. Now, this is a big danger with Obama, right? We have Ryan, the austerity ghoul, as the Speaker of the House, and we have Obama, right? And this could essentially go in the direction of a grand bargain, which would be to sell out, gouge, loot, and sack the social safety net of the American people so that Obama could preen himself and posture as the president who finally overcame the partisan denial in order to betray the people who worked to put him into office twice. In other words, the potential of Obama to become or to reassert himself, unmasked again as an austerity ghoul, as a purveyor of killer cuts, right? As someone who was willing to go down the road of genocidal austerity against the American people in cahoots with the Republicans. This is a substantial threat. Is he still angling for that? Maybe he is. I think maybe he is. The point with Obama is you have to make him understand this. The reason that the system doesn't work is that the Republican Party must be swept aside, broken up, and go into the garbage can of history. And you should be addressing that potential, not your stupid, wistful dreams of bipartisanship. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Studio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, once again, the word to Obama is drop this stupid blather about bipartisanship. That will never get you anywhere. It's absurd. It's obsolete. You'll never be able to do this because you're dealing with sociopaths in the Republican Party. They will never cooperate. Right? They have staked their careers on this. Mitch McConnell wants you out. Since he couldn't get you out 4 years ago, he wants you out now and will not do this, except if they can arrange it in such a way that the Democratic Party will be permanently crippled. And remember, it's imperative that the Republican Party collapse first. The Republican Party must go first into the garbage can of history. And then the Democrats will split. And they'll split exactly on the lines you see. Hillary and Wall Street against Bernie, who is this, Pied Piper. But still, the people who are following him are the ones that you would need to have a decent New Deal, pro-labor, progressive in a real sense, political formation in this country. If the Republicans if the Democrats collapse first, the Republicans will proceed to erect a dictatorship. It will be the permanent austerity dictatorship, which I have talked about. So this is the only road. And again, let's not kid ourselves, personalities one way or the other. This is not the main thing. The question is to fundamentally tilt the playing field in a different direction. The playing field has been tilted wrong since Richard Nixon and the Southern strategy began in 1968 and 1972. That's the disaster. Roll that back. And since the Republican Party, the leaders have shown themselves to be so stupid, so stubborn, so mired and fixated on their ridiculous Tea Party strategy, anti-government and tax cuts for the rich and racism and xenophobia. They just simply have to get out of the way. They go the way of the Federalists. They go the way of the know-nothings that they now resemble more and more. They go the way of the Whigs in the 1850s. That's where the Republicans have to go. So Obama is still worried. Can't we please compromise? No, you can't. And it's stupid. It's a crime to even think about this. It's completely wrong. How many times do you have to be beaten over the head? Right? It's apparently, some of these people are just masoch. They're masochists. So Obama's on the wrong track. Obama, you should be trying to find ways to magnify and accelerate the Republican split, which is there right before your eyes. As soon as you get off, then comes Nikki Haley's telling that Trump is the angry voice of a siren. Well, I don't know what well, obviously we're going to continue, right? But it shows how the creatures of habit are still mired in their bankrupt ideology. And again, this was the worst thing about Obama was this, how many people have starved to death and died from no medical care because Obama wanted to look like somebody who could say, I worked across the aisle and I brought the warring factions together. It can't be done. The only way to do it is to promote the demise, the extinction of the Republican Party. Let the Democrats split into two parts, and then you would have a fairly normal system, right? Compared to Europe, Japan, other places. It would look more like normalcy as it can exist in the modern world. All right, so the factions are falling. Let's look at this question about is Trump is Cruz eligible, right? There's even a problem on Rubio, it turns out, but it goes something like this: Constitution says natural born citizen, and you find all sorts of shyster lawyers on television now saying, well, yeah, it says that, but then that was a long time ago and doesn't really mean that anymore. Some of these people were the ones who were like Cruz himself, right? They're going after Obama on the birth certificate issue. So they said, no, it's, we got to be flexible now. There's so much to say about this. The first is that Cruz really is a hypocrite, right? And that the Republican base is incredibly stupid. They are just unbelievably lunkheads, lummoxes, cretins. Here's a guy who's getting financed. The campaign is based on money from Goldman Sachs and Citibank, and the wife is from Goldman Sachs. And you're supposed to believe that this guy is going to be an enemy of Wall Street. It's unbelievable. Plus, his record of, again, personal opportunism has made him universally hated. But now, as you saw last night, right, in the confrontation between Trump and Cruz, Trump argues that natural-born citizen does not mean natural-born citizen. You can be naturalized at birth. But you're dealing with two different classes of people. You have the class of United States citizens, which includes anybody born here under the 14th Amendment, thank God, and then it includes people that have been naturalized, right, through administrative procedures or other means. So we have this whole group of U.S. citizens. U.S. citizen can do lots of things, but within that, there is this group of natural-born citizens, and they are eligible for the presidency, and the other ones are not. Now, natural-born citizen, again, what does it mean? Normally, in some of these cases at least, you can go to the Anglo-Saxon common law, which is the basis, right? One of the reasons there's not going to be Sharia law in the United States is because we have the Anglo-Saxon common law. And this is, again, very deeply rooted, and it takes you back to England and Scotland. So we have the sources where you can look up these things from the Anglo-Saxon common law is the Blackstone's compendium, right? There's a British legal scholar, and that's where you find this. Let's see if we can get you the quote. Here we go. We're going to get it. So the Constitution says no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of president. So what would that mean? How do you construe natural-born citizen? Well, you don't need to guess like Chris Matthews seemed to think. We go back to the 1700s in England, and we got William Blackstone with this compendium that he wrote, and he says, natural-born citizens are such as are born within the dominions of the Crown of England. That was his frame of reference. While aliens are such as are born out of it. Madison points out, it is an established maxim that birth is a criterion of allegiance, and place is the most certain criterion. It is what applies to the United States. So it means that Cruz is a U.S. citizen, but he's not a natural-born citizen and is ineligible to run for the presidency. So good for us. Now, originalism, right? These are wretched, abject methods of reading the Constitution, right? We have to believe in an evolving interpretation, but these people are against it. And actually, on this one, it's so clear that unfortunately the textualism or originalism is going to be turned against them. Now we know textualism, originalism. This is Scalia. This is Alito, otherwise known as Scalito. This is the Rats Cabal, in a sense. They're all interested in originalism. So Cruz will tell you, if it says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, he says that's what it means. That's all it means. So, but when it comes to his supposed citizenship, he says we've got to have a loose interpretation, not strict constructionism, but the loosest of loose interpretations. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. We're recording in the afternoon of Friday, January 15th. It's Martin Luther King's birthday, so let's have a shout out for Martin Luther King, much admired by this program, and certainly one of the most important figures in recent U.S. history on the positive side. And just watch out for all the people that want to embrace King in death, who were bitterly opposed to him in life and opposed to what he stood for. Remember, the question of Martin Luther King was, at the mature point of his life when he was cut down, to unite three key components, that is to say, the anti-war movement, the black and white civil rights movement, and the black and white labor movement. Those three components. The idea of going beyond the narrow parochial bounds of this little faction or that little faction that are easy to defeat by the Wall Street ruling class. King said, no, we're going to bring together anti-war on the campuses, maybe primarily white, but not only. Civil rights, many blacks, but also whites. And labor. The last thing he was doing was the Memphis garbage men's strike. So that's what you have to see in King. An attempt to unify. There's a uniter, not a divider. And, of course, then the other question would become the program. And King would have gotten to the program. It would have grown out of some of these struggles, I would say. So, happy birthday, Martin Luther King. Now, just a couple of other things concerning this Constitution stuff, right? The Republicans have always hated the Constitution. The Libertarians hate the Constitution. Who are we kidding? The Mormons hate the Constitution, right? They just hate it. They want to tear it up. They want to shred it. And you'll see, right? Cruz has a whole program of constitutional changes he wants to bring in. Remember, they hate, for example, among the powers of Congress, to lay and collect taxes. They say no. Duties, no. Pay the debts, no. Regulate commerce with foreign nations, no. Coin money, regulate the value. No, they say. To establish post offices and post roads, no. Private sector should do it. Promote the progress of science and the useful arts. Are you kidding? Republicans hate that. Provide for the calling forth of the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrection and repel invasion. That sounds like the Oregon National Guard ought to be deployed to the Bundy enclave there in Burns. And then, of course, we have the necessary and proper clause, 18, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Now, this has reached the boiling point. We had the raving petty bourgeois proto-fascist id, Mark Levin, and his book on the Liberty Amendments. And I think we've got now the governor of Texas, Abbott, who seems to want to shoot the works for essentially oligarchical privilege with a constitutional convention. Now, let me tell you, the last thing in the world you'd ever want is a constitutional convention. A constitutional convention today would be dominated by Lilliputians, by gnomes. In contrast to the giants that were the founding fathers, we are in a period of eclipse of the human mind and the human personality. No tampering, no little fingers tampering with those rights. Now, Abbott says he wants to have a constitutional convention. Well, but he says at the same time, don't worry, none of your basic rights will be tampered with. But that's the problem. Once you've got a constitutional convention, it can go wild, and it will go wild. And the reasons it will go wild have names. One is called FBI. Another is called CIA. Another is called NSA, and so on down the line. Foreign countries, China, Saudi, will pay provocateurs to go in there and get things that they want. We are in a weakened ideological condition because we have the anti-Americanism of the left with Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky, and then we have the rabid anti-Americanism of the libertarians who say that the real economic doctrine comes not from Hamilton, not from Kerry, not from Lincoln, not from Morrill, not from the populists, not from FDR, the New Deal, and JFK, the New Frontier, and LBJ with the Great Society. No, it comes from Austria. We got it all wrong. It came from Austria. You know, George Washington, born in Austria. You get the idea, right? Von Hayek, von Mises, and these other slaves of David Rockefeller. Again, with a stupidity so abysmal that it's appalling. So let's get it clear here. No to the Constitutional Convention. That would be a leap into the abyss, and the human losses will be unbelievable. That's the last thing you want to do. You would essentially be, at the mercy, be like a philosopher, as Plato says, locked in a cage with wild animals. That's what a Constitutional Convention would look like. Now, let's see. Having mentioned this stuff about the lawlessness, we got to look at the fact that this Bundy gang is a false flag. They're obviously favored by the FBI. They are the pampered lapdogs of the FBI. The FBI refuses to lift a finger, and they come up with excuses that are just absurd. And one of the reasons for it, it's an overall policy to be sure, but the people inside the FBI who want this to happen because they are the FBI Mormon Mafia. The Church of Latter-day Saints. It's not Christian. Don't let them flim-flam you. It's Joseph Smith and Kolob and all the rest of this stuff. There's a substantial faction in the FBI that likes that stuff. And they like the idea, and Koch likes the idea, of privatizing federal lands and having them sold off at bargain basement, wretched prices to finance oligarchs and exploiters and oppressors, indeed, like the Koch brothers. So it's also funny. The Oregonian, which is the constant source right on this stuff, the FBI ousted a group of black, unarmed occupiers from that land in 1979. The FBI came in, used force, there were 4 or 5 unarmed black occupiers of the same building, the same, maybe not the same building, but the same territory. There were 4 squatters. It was called People Organized for Equal Rights. And the issue was, we've now discovered what the Bundy study group couldn't figure out, which is that the people who had owned that land were freedmen. They were emancipated slaves who had taken it over. It was the property of a former slave, had been deeded by by the former owner or some other wealthy person. But it's called Harris Neck, and there they were. And in 1979, the FBI did not hesitate. They kicked them right out. So what do we got here? One law if you're white and one more law if you're black? This is an outrage. It cannot be allowed. But what it shows is that we've got all sorts of terrible ideological problems in the federal government. And this is not a federal government ideology. This is the Mormon Mafia. And let me urge you once again, the book that I have written most recently that is the most relevant is Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney and the Mormon Takeover of America with Polygamy, Theocracy, and Subversion. You can get that from Tarpley.net. Go to Tarpley.net, click on the cover, and buy that book, please, for your own good. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on. Back in a minute. Welcome to this segment of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Let's just give you some background so you can do your own research on this stuff. The Washington Post, dated January 12th, has this interesting essay. Ted Cruz is not eligible to be president. This is written by Mary Bridget McManamon, M.C., M-A-N-A-M-O-N, and Professor McManamon is professor of constitutional law, actually a legal historian, at the Delaware Law School of Widener University. And she, again, points out that if you construe the words of the Constitution about natural-born citizen in conformity with the obvious Anglo-Saxon common law, which is the base. You can, in more complicated issues, you can use the principles of natural law to construe the Constitution. But in this case, it's just the Anglo-Saxon common law. And you have to be a natural-born citizen, it means you've got to be born within the metes and bounds, the borders of the United States. It can be a state, it can be District of Columbia, it can be a territory, or it could have been a territory up until that, but you get the idea. And then we have a lot of very slipshod legal work in the Harvard Law Review Forum by Neil Katyal and Paul Clement. They strike out on the relevant stuff. And the various sleazy shysters that come on the cable television, they've obviously been their palms have been greased by the campaign of Cruz. Now, perhaps one of the most interesting, Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School, right? This eminence grise who taught Trump. I'm sorry, not Trump. He taught Cruz, and he taught Obama and other eminent characters. So he writes is a kind of an email interview with the London Guardian. And what we find here is that, according to Tribe, Ted Cruz's citizenship and eligibility for the presidency are unsettled. Yeah, you bet they're unsettled. And the question, the argument is that you can't have somebody like this because he could sink the entire ticket. Well, some of these things could happen. I guess we don't want chaos, so it's better to have this stuff cleared up now. So the question is also about about Cruz's mother. Cruz says that he was born in Canada. That's beyond doubt. That's stipulated by everybody. Born in Canada, and that his mother was an American citizen, his father was a Canadian citizen. But now we find that Cruz's mother voted in the Canadian election, indicating that she may have also become a Canadian citizen. So, as Tribe says, if you're a strict constructionist, as Cruz obviously claims to be, he claims to be the strictest when it comes to attacking defenseless immigrants and other people like this. But when it comes to himself, he wants all the benefits of the living Constitution and modern jurisprudence and all the rest. Tribe writes, even having 2 U.S. parents would not suffice for a genuine originalist to make you natural-born citizen. And having just an American mother, as Cruz did, would clearly be insufficient at a time back then, in the 1790s, right, that made patrilineal descent, right, descent by the male line, the father's line, decisive, says Tribe. And therefore, then the problem on top of that is if the mother of Cruz was also voting in Canadian elections, it looks like his situation is pretty much desperate. So those are weighty considerations. Now, we will talk about how to stop Trump here, but let's just switch over briefly to the question of the world financial crisis, which is now making a comeback. I hope you all remember last month, about a month ago, in one of our programs, I went through the 3 pillars of this pseudo-stabilization or relative stabilization that we've had since 2008, 2009. And it's based on having a stimulus, right, an $800 billion stimulus plus a supplemental of $400 or $500 billion, so that you get up to something like $1.3 trillion in stimulus. Having that go out into the economy, of course, that ended quite a few years ago, but while it was there, it helped to stabilize things. The problem, as we've always said with a stimulus like that, is if you don't revive capital goods production, and if you don't launch on a serious program of infrastructure, then although the consumer stimulus of the Pelosi type, although that can help you in the short run, as long as the money continues to flow, it will not lead to a self-sustaining recovery. In other words, you're always going to have to come back with more and more stimulus. But anyway, that was one complex. And then we had quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3 under Bernanke and then into the Yellen era. And quantitative easing is essentially a support operation for rotten derivatives, for toxic, bankrupt, kited derivatives, as we've always said. And those derivatives clog your banks. So what the Fed was doing was buying up several $1 trillion, right, $1 trillion a year, essentially, of rotten derivatives. Now, we're against that. We don't want that to happen. But the problem is, if you're not going to do that and you're not going to do anything, you're going to have a banking panic because those banks remain bankrupt, remain clogged with those rotten, toxic derivatives. And then, of course, the zero interest rate policy, the infamous ZIRP. The ZIRP policy of zero interest rates had been going on pretty much the entire time. This refers to the federal funds overnight borrowing rate among the member banks who have to meet their reserve requirement. So that was kept to zero. And the big problem now is that's all gone, and we're getting the obvious result because of stupid Yellen's pedantry and weakness. Back in a minute. Come back to World Crisis Radio. We now have the New York close down about 2.4% on the Dow. That's 391 points. On the NASDAQ, we're down 2.74% or 127 points. And on the S&P 500, we're down 2.16%, equivalent of 42 points on the S&P 500. So all of that, I predicted that. I told you, adjust your portfolios. There's going to be some terrible turbulence here in the stock market in the first weeks of the new year because you don't have the ZERP, the 0% interest rate policy. That was taken away in December by the stupid Yellen Fed of monetarists and neoliberals and essentially people who are responding to cries from the wealthy. They're saying, I'm not getting enough on my coupons, and they want more money on their coupons. So the rentiers were dissatisfied, and the Fed, of course, decided to try to placate them. We have no stimulus, and we have no zero interest rate policy, and we have no quantitative easing. And again, we're not for quantitative easing, but if you don't want quantitative easing, you better do something to get a recovery. How do you do it? Here we go. The Tax Wall Street Party, going into this crisis, right, where we warned you a month ago, the stuff about bank capitalization, this is all a bad joke. The power of derivatives to multiply and pyramid and magnify losses sweeps aside any notion of bank capitalization that could ever be seriously advanced. So we want a 1% Wall Street sales tax to calm these markets down and to provide revenue for the federal government and indeed through revenue sharing of half of it to the various states and then thence to the counties and other local jurisdictions, right? Bernie Sanders says he wants some kind of a transaction tax to pay for free education. Well, Bernie, there already are various transaction taxes, right? One of them is the one that funds the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have a very clear policy, 1% Wall Street sales tax on stocks, bonds, derivatives, and all other financial transactions, including foreign exchange. That too, unless I suppose you can prove that it's actually based on production and not hot money speculation. At the same time, the Federal Reserve has to come up with by this time it's about $6.5 trillion, $5 trillion for infrastructure of all kinds, and about $1.5 trillion to essentially freeze the problem of the student loans, which are now crushing the middle class. This is all 0% lending, 100-year maturities, century bonds if needed, and that's your stimulus. In other words, that's going to be the greatest infrastructure program in the history of humanity. Now, specifically, if you're afraid of illegal aliens or aliens of any other kind, here's what you need. First thing you need is a protective tariff of 15%. And this is a stable institutional feature of a pro-development government here in the United States. Trump talks about the protective tariff as a kind of weapon. It's like your H-bomb or something like this. No, it's not that. It's something that you want to implement. It's not necessarily directed against anybody in particular, but it's directed in favor of preventing the United States from being made the buyer of last resort and the scene of dumping of unsaleable merchandise, because that's what's behind it. So we want to have a permanent protective tariff, and this is a modest one as protective tariffs go, 15%. So you're not going to be able to move your plant to China and expect to sell it back here because you're going to be facing a protective tariff. I challenge Trump, the fascist. If you're serious, you don't like Boeing moving the factory to China, here's how you stop them, with a 15% protective tariff. Now we have another 15. We're going to 15. We have to have a $15 minimum wage tomorrow. Once we have a serious minimum wage, then you're in a position to say, well, if I'm in the low-wage sector of the workforce, at least I have a floor of $15, and nobody can undercut that. Nobody can go below it. So at that point, you're going to compete based on your ability. You're not going to have terrified, super-exploited foreign workers being brought in here, threatened, and made to work for $7 an hour, the current $7.25 current federal minimum wage. They're not going to be able to do that. In other words, you're going to be able to compete with them on a level field in terms of ability, work ethic, and all the rest of it. So 15% protective tariff. $15 minimum wage. Then you need a union. That's the other thing. If you want to keep your wages up, why, you've got to have collective bargaining. The relevant United Nations documents list collective bargaining as a basic human right, and it is. So we need to dump the Taft-Hartley law, this reactionary, union-busting, scabbing monstrosity. We want to go back to the Wagner Act that says, as an American, you have a right to collective bargaining, a right to organize yourself in a union and confront the bosses and the financiers, some hope of being able to resist them. It's a right. So down with the Taft-Hartley Act and up with the new version of the Wagner Act. Maybe we can make it even more favorable to labor, because we've got to adjust that playing field, right? The playing field has been rigged against the unions, and it will soon be rigged more against the unions. The rats cabal of Roberts, Alito, Thomas, and Scalia are looking at this California case about, if you benefit from collective bargaining, should you be charged the very basic minimal expenditure of your share of supporting the collective bargaining team. It does not include political contributions or a series of other things. It's really a bare bones contribution. But of course, the reactionary legal foundations are now stoking this one, that soon unions will be even weaker than they are. And then, of course, what you need is a tightening, and I'm talking about a tightening of the labor market. 30 million new productive jobs with modern technology and a decent and increasing capital investment per worker, not just a $10 rake, but 100,000, 200,000. This is where a decent capital expenditure even begins to be possible, right? When you should really get into the millions in modern technology. So with that, you've got a much better chance of getting a job. You also want to have access to free, essentially free, public education in a community college or in a state institution, a state college, state university, what have you. That's got to be free. And, of course, in order to pay for that, you're going to need that 1% Wall Street sales tax, by which Wall Street will make reparations for what they did to this country in 2007, 2008. None of them has gone to jail. They should thank their lucky stars. And quite frankly, I'd rather have their money than their incarceration. Right? Their incarceration is it might be emotionally satisfying to some, but we're looking for solutions here. Now, by the way, I challenge Bernie Sanders to come up with something like that. 30 million new productive jobs, the rebuilding of these institutions. Bernie has messed a little bit with the Federal Reserve. He says we want the governors of the Federal Reserve to be drawn from all walks of life. This gets us nowhere. They'll be bought up and bribed and taken care of by Wall Street. We've got to have Wall Street functioning under the Federal Reserve functioning under federal law, the Fed. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome to the final segment of this week's program on World Crisis Radio. It's the 15th of January, and we're wrapping up now. I want to repeat, and we'll be talking about this a lot to the extent that it goes anywhere, right? The people who have wanted a constitutional convention are the bad guys, and there's a bunch of corrupt and disoriented quackademics who seem to want it, but above all, Republican demagogues, right? People who they're willing to say anything to get elected, right? Tampering with this system in the way that they propose, right? This essentially a zoological garden will be the area where these things get decided. The Rubios, the Abts, I think we've got a whole bunch of other Republican candidates on this, right? It is a true monstrosity. So don't fall for this. This is a fake. The CIA and the FBI will run this thing totally. So it's time to oppose it. Now, we've talked enough about Trump, right? By the way, one of the dangers here is that Cruz, with his hypocrisy and his unctuous, pained expression of concern and his cheap debaters' points and rhetorical tricks, Cruz is so hateful and so odious that he's beginning to make Trump look like a lesser evil, and he is not. He is not. He is a, absolutely great evil. Obviously, it may come down to some tactical questions about which one of these people should be knocked out of the race first. But that's the problem with Cruz. He's a kind of a lightning rod for hatred that really ought to be shared by Trump. Let's talk about how to stop Trump. And remember, in France, we had something similar, right? This wretched National Front, Le Front National, of Marine Le Pen. And Marine is, of course, the daughter of this character, Jean-Marie Le Pen, I believe his name is, who was an official of the Vichy fascist government of France between 1941 and 1944, approximately, or maybe in some parts into 1945 in some castle in Germany. But that's the way it went. The effect was that in the recent French regional elections, this Front National, the National Front, looked like it was going to win control of a lot of key regions, and this you don't want. Except the French voters were decent enough and intelligent enough, and this was bipartisan. This was Sarkozy supporters, Hollande supporters, and others, coming out to make sure that this despicable Marine Le Pen did not get control of any area whatsoever. She was completely shut out in the second round. Now, do we have here in the United States that much intelligence, that much guts, that much energy, right? Are you willing to turn out to save your country and spend an hour or two, whatever it is? So the party of Trumpery, and again, it means rubbish and trash, and it means deception and cheating and betrayal. And again, it includes adultery as a form of cheating. The party of Trumpery is now at the gates. I'm hoping for a mass mobilization, right? The American people are not fascist. As a matter of fact, in many ways, the American people are the anti-fascist nation par excellence. We never had a fascist government. We never collaborated with a fascist government in the sense that the appeasers in Britain or France, the Daladiers and the Chamberlains did with Hitler, and even the sad episode of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. So nobody escaped this, it would seem, except the United States. So maybe we have some reserves that we can draw on. Here's what I would like to see. First of all, negative advertising. So far, there has been almost no negative advertising about Trump. He deserves to be buried in a landslide, in an avalanche of negative advertising to expose his rotten past, his rotten career, his dirty life, his rip-offs of people in Atlantic City, his union busting, his outlandish statements, his personal self-aggrandizement, and so forth. We need to go negative on Trump. Get your Oppo research going. Find out things about this guy. There's got to be a gold mine or a sewer, a cesspool of information about Trump. Oppo research. Get the dirt. Get it out there. Anybody can do some of this stuff, right? If you know some embarrassing facts, well then send them in. I am very interested in Trump's rallies because what I see is a series of violent incidents at Trump's rallies which are not getting reported. Specifically, I see Gestapo tactics being used by Trump. Here, I got some links. A Muslim woman aged 56 was kicked out of a Donald Trump event and booed by the audience. Now, this woman, the libertarians tried to slander her, saying, "Oh, she's a terrorist." This is somebody who protests against the Israeli occupation of the occupied territory. She's essentially for the PLO or something like that. So this is not what those libertarians are trying to tell you. But she was sure kicked out just because she stood up in protest, and she had a Jewish partner in this to make it a broader event. But it doesn't matter with Trump; he kicked him out. Donald Trump's violence is increasing the debate inside the Republican Party, according to Time magazine. The Washington Post, back in late November, black activist punched at Donald Trump rally in Birmingham, Alabama. In Iowa, we have that robocalls from the Trump campaign are being done by essentially neo-Nazis, white supremacists, KKK, Stormfront, you name it. They're all for Trump. And you get the idea. I'm wondering, and people should help me, send it in, right? Go to the contact feature on tarpley.net. Is there nobody who's making a compendium, a comprehensive list and short characterization, right? Short description, when, where, who got hit concerning Trump? I got one of them where he says the guy was beaten up and he deserved to be beaten up. Okay. Another one says, kick him out of here and don't let him take his coat. Well, that's the voice of the German-American Bund. Hey, maybe his father, Fred, was in the German-American Bund. Why don't we ask him that? When you have these press availabilities, go to them, grill him, ask him these questions, because the media are essentially helping him, right? The media are putting him on television. MSNBC puts a raw feed of Trump's rally in various places on there just about every week, right? So we're seeing that not only is he tolerated, but he's actually assisted. This is an open secret. How about this? How about the rappers? Let's get the rappers going, right? Because Trump rhymes with chump, rhymes with rump, rhymes with frump. Let's get busy and let's use the method of mockery and satire, because he deserves it. Otherwise, we're going towards a situation where a timid socialist, social democrat like Bernie, is going to be facing off against a Mussolini or a Nazi. And in those contests, historically, the social democrat has lost. The petty bourgeoisie wants to see who is stronger. Don't let Trump appear as the strongest one. And watch out for the Trumpery. So we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.